Sorry, man. How do you turn it off, eh? Coming now?
Is the pot ready? Huh?
Yeah. I deserved a coffee, my guys.
The judgment might say this, a typewriter behind went at this little, that place that was so secure, and he was in solitary confinement.
But by this stage, you already knew
Yes.
what the security branch was.
Yeah.
I see. I think, and I have to.
The SP humiliated. That's sad to know, and this is the first time. And then for the next person, no matter the color, the creed of your, but most of all, to him, his faith, which we call Imam, was his
Then it goes to this. Oh no. See, this is exactly why he shouldn't be turning his fucking camera off every time there's a recess, because then I have to redo this. Display capture, window capture. Window capture. And I can even see this on the YouTube. Worst situation ever. Okay, so now what I'm gonna, do you think I should leave or go back?
If this is moving, if this is playing as it is, he's going to operate.
What?
He's going to operate.
No, he's always operating.
Then it's fine.
No, but it's like this, the stream dropping, which is what I can fix if I get a...
Yeah.
It's much better than it's been all day.
Maybe see how it goes and then take a run.
You know, it's either I leave now or wait. I should leave now. No, I'm gonna leave now.
It's got to be that.
Are we all ready? Solid and good.
What plan?
I was 18 when my father passed away in September 1960. Uh, 5 years.
5 years you wouldn't fair.
Yes, and my sister, my brother, yes, because she was sick.
Yes, so she would have been about 6.
Yes.
What I'm hoping to achieve is what is the full extent of commitment with Father wants. That's was prepared to sacrifice his family's time. And was prepared to sacrifice seeing 12-year-old, 18-year-old grow up. Not only for the love of his family, but for the better love of human time.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
I'm correct to depict that's the essence of who he was.
Yes, his essence was not only just for the community, for us, for the community as a whole. Because as an Imam, it's a very privileged position to be in. And you have the mosque and you have the congregation. And this congregation will listen to the Imam's advice, or they will obey him. So my father had to be firm and well read. He was well read in Arabic in the Quran because he studied there and he memorized the Quran. And my Lord, just one story. My father, when his secular education stopped in Cape Town, and then his aunt took him to Mecca. And when he finished his studies, because there they studied not in a school but in the precinct of the Kaaba, the mosque. When they completed their studies, then the sheikh or the person who taught them, there were 3 friends, my father was one, and he asked them, what would you give in return as payment for what you studied? I think the other 2, either they had money, they built a mosque or community center, I'm not sure exactly, but my father said to the chef, I have no money, but I will fast Mondays and Fridays for the rest of my life. And that's exactly what he did. I know.
I understood from my friends and from the letters that the father wrote, some donations or the monies.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to go to most, but we tended to also appreciate church.
Yes, yes. He was, as I said, he was a Muslim, but to him, color and creed, there was no distinction. So he did work probably with the church. I wouldn't know.
Now, I also make reference to CC or the letters that we confirm that it's John Collins.
Yes, yes. It was 10 months.
Yes, now I have the images that Karen Collins, John Collins, was a priest in the Anglican Church and was also active in several political movements in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
Is that the same?
That's correct. Yeah, it's the same 10 months.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah, just a few questions by report. This PAC Pan-African Youth Congress, what do you understand it?
Well, what I understood, I didn't belong to them, but they, only they said belong to the PLC, and they've also fought for the freedom and justice in South Africa under the time of apartheid, like the ANC. So they worked maybe, some people belong to the ANC, and some people belong to the PS, Pan-African Congress.
Yes. And from my little understanding and the comment that you made, it seems that this Porto was its military route.
It seems like it. That's what I understood from it.
So it was a political formation that was opposed to the government of the Republic of South Africa.
Yes, apartheid regime.
I see. And when your father said sacrifices must be made for a good cause, what did you understand? What do you understand by what do you think?
Well, my understanding, the good cause is they were oppressed people
Yes,
at that time.
yes,
The time in the 60s, 50s, 60s, I think the 70s, I wasn't here, but the South African regime at that time, of course, separated colors and put the whites in white area, blacks and in Islam, everybody is free. This is our understanding in Islam. Therefore, a good cause for him was, to him, he believed that the pen was mightier than the sword. And to talk about the good causes, to help those in need, help those who were in destitute, and those with difficult days for some people. Very difficult. I wasn't here, but I had an inkling of it. So the good cause is to serve your humanity, no matter how small, and no matter what you have, but to share and to guide and to fight the apartheid regime. I mean, they were stronger than the people. The regime had all the paraphernalia of a state that kept the majority of the people down. And we believed that it was our duty to fight for a good cause. And this was his understanding.
Would that good cause include one finds in the values of the Constitution? Human dignity, freedom, and justice.
Yes, you have to fight for freedom and justice. Because, my Lord, in Islam, in the Quran, we are given guidance. And our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he also went through these difficult days. He had to sacrifice his home, travel from Mecca to Medina, because people were fighting against him. Now we're not living in that time, but in those times of the 50s, 60s, people had very difficult lives here under the regime of apartheid. And he thought that we had to sacrifice something for a good cause.
So, in conclusion, or as part of the concluding questions, it seems to me that this freedom wasn't free, and we mustn't be dumb about it.
The freedom we have now.
Yes. I'm saying the freedom wasn't free, and we don't have to be dumb about
Don't
it. Yes.
do good.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, freedom. How do you explain freedom? The people who is in charge of us or is running the country, they're running it on equal terms, equal rights for everybody. So, are we living in a freedom now? After apartheid, we are in a better situation than we were during the time of apartheid.
Just in conclusion, when one looks into the context, having regard to the record of the inquest to date, it seems that the sacrifice that your father referred to in his letter included ultimately having to lay down his life.
Have to go along with him in the car to either deliver sweets at certain shops, and he would interact, as she also indicated, with whosoever is there. Even the poor person would sometimes come, because in fact when he went to Langa or Buledu, the children there, of course my age, would refer to as Umfundisi in a very respectful manner, because they knew he was an Imam, but they also knew that he was Umfundisi from a different community. And I think that sort of struck Paul with them. But more importantly is that he was a very generous character. He would give sweets to his children too. Now, of course, he would ask, but now he's giving out the profits of this company to his children. Of course, he didn't care. For him, these kids need to be addressed. And I think he basically reached out to them, which sometimes others basically are hesitant even to do that. So that's part of that sort of sociable, gregarious, interactive character that he had. Of course, I mean, when you talk about Joe, he was always happy for lucky. I mean, wherever he went, he always had a smiling face. He always greeted others before they even greeted him. In other words, there was that connection they had with the community that I think it was somewhat, I mean, at the time, maybe amongst groupings, it was incomparable. It just stood out to have had that charismatic character that I think one could latch onto. And when I say that, even my cousins and, they all saw this uncle of them there as their father. In other words, he cared for them. And we used to have, or rather, my father used to have a sort of a long kettle, and many children could be put in it, and he would put them all on, and he would go out with them. And he was a bit of a fast driver too, and he liked to sort of take these twists and turns just to give the children that joy of being in a car. And so all of these were basic indicators of the type of individual. Like my sister indicated, I mean, he had no airs and graces. He interacted with whoever he could. And there was once we were in a car, and we, in fact, near the house that my sister lived. He went around the corner very fast, but he knew that there were gamblers in the street gambling. And these guys all scattered, and he was laughing, partly because he just wanted to have the joy. And of course, they shouted, "Imam, why are you doing this?" Of course, he laughed back at them. He said, "We must be gambling." But it is the type of individual you are, a very infectious way of doing things, and I think that all endeared them towards him. Other people were attracted towards him because of the likable individual that he was. And just to sort of close at this point, I think even as an imam, I mean, one would assume that somebody who is in that particular position would be very serious. But this imam was unlike those. In other words, he saw things in a very different light. And I think just to sort of, not that actually to jovial this, but my elder sister was trained on piano. In other words, my father bought a piano for her to learn. And the mere fact that she was granted this demonstrate that he was unlike others who felt that you should not bring music into the home. In other words, music is something, not as taboo, but it's not part of a Muslim character to have a piano in that and to play music in that. And here is this young daughter of his whom he enjoyed giving an opportunity to become familiar with music. And so, I mean, all of these sort of are indicators that this Imam was just an extraordinary individual. I mean, of course, he's my father, but I think he just stood out to respond to issues that are sometimes viewed not sort of very acceptable within Muslim practice, but he looked partly beyond that. And I think that for the community was a way of sort of a form of education. And I mean, so yeah, let me just.
So it's quite clear that your father had a burning desire for social justice, achievement of equality and democracy. Can you speak about the motivation behind that desire to the point where he was willing to put himself at risk, put himself in harm's way?
My lord, I think again it's all to do with his educational background, the exposure they had. I mean, in the 1950s, and after he had returned from Mecca, we had also great teachers who were based in Cape Town. There was one Sheikh Ismail Hanif Edwards, who himself was little has been known of him then, but a book has been written. But the point which I want to make is that he had very important guides that mentored him. And I think that helped him. But in addition to that, these individuals were also very much politically aware. They were not necessarily politically active, but they were aware and therefore encouraged my father to basically respond to the needs of society. And with his own education, because he also read quite a bit, despite the fact that he only passed standard 2. But he was one who always picked up a book, and of course we had a library of books of his, and in that way he educated himself. But not only himself, but he was also he was tied up with various youth groups at the mosque where he was. He set up the Claymont Muslim Youth Association. But this youth group they were made up of teachers and builders and people from various backgrounds. And as a result of their presence, they also educated him about these sectors in society. They were professional teachers who were part of his congregation. But they were also connected to the new unity movement at that time. They were associated with the Teachers League of South Africa. They were part of the Pan-Africanist Congress. So in other words, he was exposed to all of these groupings. And because of his ideas, my Lord, in terms of his understanding of Islam, teaching that you must be colorblind, in other words, you must look beyond race, you must look at even beyond the creed, though, of course, coming from a Muslim background, he basically demonstrated in a very tangible, practical way as to what it meant to be somebody who lived within a highly secular society, highly racist society, and in that way tried to demonstrate through his own example of how to basically do so. So politically, when we talk about his political education, it was through these the Teachers League of South Africa members who were based in Cape Town, and of course the Pan-African Congress. Maybe I should just quickly say that the PAC was more dominant at the Cape as compared to the ANC, and as a result of that, he was very much in contact. And of course, prior or alongside the PAC, we should mention the Colored People's Congress, that was also part of the anti-apartheid struggle. And so people like Uncle Bani Desai, they were of course very much members of the Colored People's Congress, and of course later they shifted to the PAC. But the point which I want to make, all of these political groupings gave my father a different insight or an added insight on Richie's ideas as to how to enact or to lead his community to look beyond the racial boundaries that we are in. And so when he was appointed, when he got the opportunity to become a sales representative for Wilson Boundaries, which by the way is just down the road in Metro Police Station, their offices were a few meters from there, which is also interesting. But the point which I want to make is that with this my train of thought. So basically, his exposure to through these groups helped him to look at things through a broader lens, and therefore he applied these the way he understood his religious tradition, because he was schooled in Islamic thought, and he was exposed to other activists as well. If I may mention, say, Qutb, for example, who have been vilified and demonized in the secular media for being the father of terrorism. This scholar, this individual who himself was oppressed in the Egyptian society, demonstrated in because he himself was concerned with social justice, and he wrote a book, by the way, titled Social Justice, this Arabic text. And so the Imam, because some of these books also were in the library, which demonstrated that the Imam was quite familiar with some of the issues, and because of our situation, our racist environment in which we were, the Imam became familiar with his religious teaching and how to apply those ideas within this particular context. And it is for that reason that he basically did that. Now, when he was sales representative for Wilson Boundaries, as we all know, within the apartheid surroundings, you could not go from our area in Athlone to Langa or Guguletu without a pass. And so, in a sense, this gave him a license to do so because he was a Swiss representative, of course, for Watson Downfield. So it gave him that opportunity, and he used that to the best of his well, of course, in the circumstances. And so whatever monies came in through by Karen Collins or the defense and others, he used it and channeled them to assist whomsoever he could. So in a sense, the opportunity that they had, and of course the understanding that they had, helped him basically to move along these sort of pathways, and he demonstrated through his person as to how one should basically carry oneself in basically serving and assisting and contributing towards the transformation of our society.
Thank you. Now, certain of your father's activities, particularly his connections with those in the Pan Congress of that 1916 was a prohibited organization. He must have been aware that this was going to attract the attention of the security apparatus in South Africa. Do you have a recollection of the kind of monitoring and attention that was given to your father by the security branch at that time?
My Lord, I think I also understand from our own study of our father and the history that we were able to, sort of the information that we gathered. And I think in one of the security branches reports too, they indicated that they were already monitoring since the early 1960s, late 1950s. But why I say by the early 1960s specifically is partly because there was a speech that he gave in the Droog Hall in Cape Town, and he basically spoke out against the system in a very audible public manner, demonstrating clearly where he stood pertaining to the apartheid system. And I think that, of course, brought the attention of the security on him, and as a result, and this is 1961, at the time when, as we all know, this country became a republic, of course, from the, but of retaining its image as a racist system. But it became a republic, so there was this response. And interestingly, on that day when or the time when this it was announced to be a republic, the Imam and his friend protested. And what did they do? They decided that they will fast for 3 days against the system, to just demonstrate in one way to what extent they they basically rejected the system, violently rejected. So that is sort of just a sort of type of indication as to how he reacted to these. So the security branch therefore had him sort of had surveillance since then, but it seemed that it became more and more intense when he himself sort of deepened his sort of relationship with these networks. And from the letters that and from the letter that was read out earlier, it's clear that the Imam was basically prepared to move along this path, partly because spiritually, if I may, my Lord, just explain this. Because, as my sister indicated, he fasted, he promised his teacher that he will fast every Mondays and Thursdays, which he did. But on top of that, he himself had being a religious leader, he beefed himself up spiritually, so to speak, with these little acts. Not only just fasting, but also serving his community as best as he could. And so, in a sense, all of these acts helped him to gear himself for what was to come, which he, of course, did not know, as a family, he didn't know. And so, when he was detained, I think up to the time he was killed, I think he sort of counted this through his own spiritual status, so to speak, standing as such. And no matter how maybe we might be understanding this, but I mean, this is sort of the type of person that he was. He prepared himself for that. So during the period of surveillance, I suppose he was pretty well aware of it. And maybe just to state this, that people used to come to the house, even the house where we shifted to in Athlone, the Pulse Road. And people used to basically come there either for food or for money. And of course, normally, and on this particular day, prior to his detention, his taken to custody on the 8th of May, 1969, somebody had come to the house, wanted money, and of course, this person was basically trapped, set for the security to come. And of course, it was as a result of that he was eventually then taken. But basically, yeah, he was under surveillance for quite a while, but it came on more intense during the late years.
So let's turn to that fateful day, Wednesday, the 28th of May, 1969, when the Imam got arrested. You were at school at the time. Can you indicate to the court your experience of your father's arrest?
Yeah, of course, again, these were many years ago, my lord. Of course, being just 12, I was in standard 7. That's particularly, my sister, of course, was at another school, not far from where we were staying. And we were then informed whilst at school that I had to come home. But we also were aware of the fact that this particular day that it was taken into custody was when the community was celebrating the birth day of the Prophet, whom all Muslims emulate or try to emulate as best as they can. And so, of course, that was in the evening. In the early morning, we were told to come. And
Please take your time. Please have some water. We don't know when it's ready. Please take all the time you need.
And was for help, and on that, he informed that he was taken in. And as a result of that, of course, many members of the congregation, where my father was the Imam, many of them came, particularly the elderly of that community that we respect him for the work that he had been doing, and so all of them congregated at the house. Nonetheless, the point which I want to make is that, of course, it was a very difficult issue that, of course, we had to deal with, because we never thought that this would happen. But this is something that we have encountered. But just related to that, maybe I should say this, and maybe again for some of the points that my sister shared, is that he was involved in a very clandestine manner with the networks that he had. And if I may describe it as political networks, I don't like, because after all, it's for social justice, so you don't sort of compartmentalize the one as being the other. In other words, we're living in a racist society, in an oppressive society. My father, as Imam, as a community leader, felt that he needed to respond to this. And so the activities that he undertook, not even some of his very close friends within the circles that he had created were aware of the activities that he was pursuing. In other words, assisting the needy or going out to communities and to extend his hand in whichever way he could. So when he was taken that day, of course, we were all deeply affected by that event, but also knowing that this was a turning point for the family, for the community, and of course for us as children, it was difficult part because I was just sort of at the stage of moving from a young boy child into sort of the adolescent stage. And for one, now that one has one thing back and try to get your mind around this event, and more so about his life or the way he had carried himself as such. So, of course, so this particular day was something just which we never expected, as we had said, but something that we had to basically deal with, because the idea of being taken custody for terrorist activities, and we asked the question, of course, we still ask the question, what do we mean by being a terrorist? Who is a terrorist? Is this man doing good to the very fellow human beings? How can he be considered and described as a terrorist? But be that as it may, of course, the racist system had an act that basically defended their case as sort of, and of course would apprehend anyone. So in our father's case, of course, this was it. And of course, the two leading individuals from security branch were Major Khamis and Inspector Blake. And of course, I think my father had already met up with them prior to this actual fateful day, because I think, as we had said, that they had been monitoring him. Yeah, so as from that period onwards, of course, things, as we had mentioned, changed radically for us as a family. Sorry.
That's a great insight into his days and circumstances. Mr. Haron, you also mentioned in your statement that not long after your father was arrested, various close friends and congregants from the mosque, including family members, were then hauled in by the security branch. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, that was automatic practice of the security branch. Whoever, of course, after my father was taken, those of the close circle were part of the congregation. They were all, my uncle, for example, Kassim Budan was taken in, and so were his friends taken in. All of them were holding. Asked about these networks. And the interesting part, the revelation, of course, what the security branch realized, that none of them could really pinpoint or give them any detailed information about the network. But also must also bear in mind that because of the fearfulness of the security branch, there were always rumors or suspicions of the other automatically. There were those who pointed fingers at others within the congregation that it might be X or Mr. Y. And so, this caused much disunity even amongst the congregants themselves. But be that as it may, the point is that, yes, all of them were hauled in, and I have, unfortunately, I can't, I'll have to look in my files, but pointed that there were those who shared their sort of letters with me to indicate that on this day they were hauled in for questioning. But as we had indicated, my lord, that none of them could concretely give any evidence, even against their religious leader, as to where he had went, whom did he connect, where did he give it to. In fact, he did not even let his friends who took him to a place know to whom he was sort of giving funds. So in other words, there was somehow I think one is of the notion that he was fully aware of the acts he was sort of involved in, and how to keep the information sort of strictly to himself without having them implicated if found out. So there was that sort of relationship that they had, and I think at some point all of them understood that their Imam was really involved. And some of them, I do recall one of my father's friends who told me when I had interviewed him many years ago, passed away now, who said that, I warned your father not to go into place A or B, but he would not listen. But this is partly to do with the Imam's foresight, insight, and concern, because his life did not matter. It was important to assist him wherever he could in those circumstances. I think that quality also that stood out, and I think remained in our memories as somebody who was trustworthy. Now, you can give him anything, but that trustworthiness was so embedded in his persona that it's something that very few. Sometimes when one looks at oneself, you say, but how trustworthy can you be? Not as that. So in a sense, I think these comrades, if I may describe them as such, congregants basically realized that this Imam was just somebody who stood out for them. And, yeah, so that's.
So then he was a selfless man, a man who could be relied on to work for the greater good.
Very much so. I think he was relied on not only by the elders, because in fact, when he was appointed Imam, one of the elders was, there was a man named Ismail, calling his nickname Johnny, who were instrumental in his appointment. Of course, this was the year when I was born, but here's what the story, the whole history that sort of I was able to gather. They realized that here was a young man. Of course, he was just 18, his early 30s, who could be appointed. And at that time, in the Muslim community, my lord, you don't appoint young men in these positions as to be a religious leader. You basically appoint an elderly or an older individual with more experience, so on. But for some reason, they eyed him. And interestingly, just as a footnote story, is that the Claremont Main Road, the Stefan Road Mosque, Claremont, where he became the Imam, and this Claremont Main Road Mosque, which is not a few meters away from the street, were rivals of sorts, theological rivals, and they were looked down upon. And when Imam, my father was appointed Imam there, those up there who were also related familiarly to him in one or the other, they did not like this idea. But with that as it may, after his appointment, he demonstrated in a very tangible way the changes that he could bring about with the grouping that it had, particularly the men and the women, because he was also open to women education. He would encourage the women to also see themselves be educated in their tradition as such. So in that way, he was quite his understanding of religion itself and his application of the basic principles were sort of very different to the older guard as such. So yeah, so when he sort of led this grouping in the sort of late 50s, mid 50s, into the 60s, he demonstrated in different ways his ability to lead. But that is partly also to do with his character, the personality that he had, the respect that he had shown his elder, as well as the young emerging community as such.
Would you agree that the context of your father's detention, in particular his interrogation, was really set by the fact that these congregants could not tell the security branch much. They were unable to implicate him in the work.
Sorry, true. I think when we talk about the congregants, he himself, on the one hand, realized what he was sort of up against. He also was aware that if he should bring on board any of his young colleagues who gave him support, it would have negative impact, so to speak, on their lives and on their families. So the best was just to go as a lone ranger, so to speak. In other words, to do things on your own. In other words, to keep your trust, to keep that confidence going, to keep that support going, but without implicating them. So many of those who were holding, as we had mentioned earlier on, could not, in fact, the security groups, they were themselves somewhat disappointed that they couldn't find one character from the to act as their informant. Now, having said that, I think there were also the notion that there were informants, but they were on the periphery rather than in the center, because the Imam and his group were very close. Some of them were my uncles, my mother's brothers, and close friends. And so, in a sense, they knew one another inside out, so to speak. I think this sort of kept those who were on the periphery, were informants, for whatever purpose, basically at bay. But still, interestingly, when he had gone on pilgrimage to Malone in 68, as well in 68, there were people there who reported back to the tourists. They were already on his tail, so to speak, wherever he went. So nothing was unknown. Even went to Cairo. In Cairo, for example, he went as a. Now he also, by the way, I did not mention this. He also worked not part-time, but he represented the travel agent. The one in Salzburg, I'm trying to think of the name now, PTA, Partner Travel Agency, PTA. And he went to a conference in Cairo where he represented the travel agent there, because as we know that many Muslims go on pilgrimage annually and on a minor pilgrimage. And so in a sense he represented that interest group and attended that, but the idea is not just to attend that conference, but to also meet up with Ibrahim and the other members from ESC as well as ANC. Because when I went to study in Riyadh, I met somebody from the ANC who said that I met your father back in Cairo. So there was this sort of interconnection that sort of was there. So in a sense, he kept himself aware of all the networks of the groupings, and I think in that way, he kept it to himself rather than bringing in members of the congregation, because he knew the negative impact he would have had. And I think that sort of models of connecting succeeded very well for him, because up to the time when he was killed, and as indicated in his letter, it's airtight. You won't get anything from me. And that word he kept to the day he was killed.
So it does seem, Mr. Haron, that after the congregants and others were rounded up, the security branch were left empty-handed.
Very much so, yeah.
And as you just pointed out, from the letters to Bani Hassan, he wasn't going to disclose, he wasn't going to betray anyone. And in your view, did that probably drive the security branch, perhaps it enraged them to abuse him even more?
Well, I think that's all part because they just couldn't get anything out of this Imam. They thought might be a soft target. He hardened himself internally. I think, like we have said, added to that was his own spiritual development. Normally, within the Muslim theological understanding, that somebody who embeds himself, my Lord, into these activities will basically transform yourself to the point that nobody else will be able to enter you, so to speak, physically or otherwise, to change your attitude and mind. And I think, so basically he was quite, and of course, I think the word enraged might be too mild a word, because these guys were livid, they were so angry at this Imam, and they had to mistreat him as best as they could, if I can describe it in that way. Humiliate him. I think that portion that was narrated, I think,
Perhaps we can pause there. Can I ask you to comment on his state of health, his physical condition prior to his arrest?
as far as my memory goes, I think he was generally pretty healthy because he was moving around. He was, as my sister described, very active, sociable, outgoing person in a sense. I mean, as we had, mentioned that he was sales representative for Round, so he had to be on the road all the time, most of the time, from early morning till sort of late at night, but also seeing to the needs of the community. So all these, there were no indications of somebody doing these who was in any way concerned with the pain in his chest or reflecting any illness or so. He was pretty healthy, yes.
You say he loved rugby and cricket, and he was a frequent visitor to the sports grounds.
Oh yeah, I think it was just one of those. I should just quickly mention before I contextualize further. He went to play one morning, and he had a jersey, and that jersey was added numeral number 8. Well, number 8, as you know, in fact, he was basically. He was a scum off, but he had the number 8 on his jersey, and everybody else had the Roman numeral, 1, 2, 3, whatever. But he had this. So, but it was part of his way of making things easier on the field, because now they sort of going into hopefully win the other team. But so the Imam sort of stood out, but he used to play for Green. He used to play cricket. There was a cricket team known as the Muslim Cricket Club. There was a patient in the political arena. They basically had a different.
We can turn to the area of detention. You know that he was, prior to his death, he was in detention for a period of 120. Your experiences of his detention, how the family coped at that time.
Yeah, it was indeed, and it remains, I think, even when one thinks about it, very difficult. But despite, I think, the encounters of how emotional, we had to just, and as you know from the reports, they were, because he fasted, he decided to fast, but we need to give him food on a daily basis. But after all, they basically requested that we have home food, which for some strange reason, I say strange, because the security branch allowed. Yeah, I was a member of the twice. And my cousin was, of course, much older than I, of course, was trying to keep the conversation going. And what is interesting in that event as well was my mother was concerned about was his father. His father was still very much alive, passed away, I think not too long after that. But he was in to settle, if I recall some of those things. And of lies about, whatever was generally speaking. And so in a sense, we never believe
The court effectively found that nobody was to blame. The security branch members in question, notably Major Finnis and Sergeant indicate to the court, give an idea of your own professional expertise?
Yes, thank you, my lord. I have been in the academia for almost 40 years. I started out at the University of Western Cape as a specialist in teaching Arabic, it's a foreign language, and then switched to Islamic studies, specializing in religious studies, teaching at the University of Cape Town. Then towards the end of the 1990s, I went to Botswana. I've been for 2 decades teaching in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. There I became Professor of Religious Studies.
Thank you, Mr. Imam.
Of that, the Unity Movement, and he was being an employer, so he was capacity, but also he was a friend of the Imam. And so he was brought in basically to advise the senior council. So this sort of process, this event of the prayer was followed by the burial, and this took place the Monday afternoon. So he was washed in the morning, put to Muslim rites, then we performed the prayer, and then from there taken to the graveyard where he was ritually buried. Of interest to note is that, first of all, the community was of the notion that because of the way he died, he's a martyr. But they used the Arabic term shaheed. And in addition to that, what happened the Monday evening, an earth tremor took place. Now, of course, this was within Muslim theology or thinking, this was associated with the person who was buried. And even others who did not belong to the Muslim faith seem to have had the same notion that the earth tremor was a response to the injustice that was basically acted against my father. Whatever, of course, the argument is, the point is that whenever people think about the earth tremor, they think about the death of the Imam. Death of the Imam, and they think about the earth tremor. But extracted from that is also the argument has been that this tremor took place very much in Tilbach, outside of Cape Town, Melbourne. And the argument is when we think back to the 17th and 19th, when he disappeared from Maitland Police Station, because as we know, the records don't really describe that period. The argument was taken up to one of those towns where they could deal with the Imam in the way they did. And we adopted that notion as well, although there's no tangible evidence or proof to say this had happened, but this is more or less the argument that continues to circulate despite lack of veracity about it. So the event, like in Muslim custom, as we indicated, these events of burial, death and burial takes place within a short period of time because the other religious argument is basically put the body to rest, and of course now the soul takes its journey in the hereafter, whatever that is understood also from a theological view. And that more or less.
Thank you. And as a young boy, seeing tens of thousands of people to commemorate your father's life, did that get a sense of the standing that he had in the community?
No, indeed. I think it was a reflection of the connection that I had with the community, that part of it which he led as one of the recognized local imams or clerics and such. But it was also an affirmation of particularly certain individuals who were there, who came from homes that he extended his assistance to. In other words, identifying with this person who basically had laid his life for a greater cause. This cause to bring about the social justice, which he did not see in his lifetime, but which we are supposed to be experiencing. I say suppose, partly because of the unfortunate and sad corruption that has become prevalent in our society. But with that as in, I think it is for this cause that they could identify with and they also yearn for, which of course many of them passed away, did not don't enjoy the freedom which you raised earlier, my Lord. And I think all of us enjoy maybe the type of freedom that we have. I mean, sometimes one thinks back and say, what would the Imam have done in this period if he had witnessed, experienced? Of course, there are just hypothetical questions, but one continues to ask, and one continues to ask not only because of Imam Haron. You think about Steve Biko, you think about several others who have laid down their life for this society that we are living in, for the events that are taking place that are negative rather than positive.
Indeed. Mr. Haron, if we can, before we turn to the next,
Let's think loud on that point. Every insight in these proceedings, you know that I don't hesitate to think loud. And one, on that note, one asks oneself, learning that the Imam was a member of the Pan-Africanist Congress, and knowing its closeness of ideology to learn, and one seeing basically modern day concentration camps in which the blacks are still, settled in the metro. What are your thoughts?
Well, like I told you, my Lord, when I opened, I said, I have been cynical, and literally and figuratively, partly because of just of the view that many of us struggle for a better life, for a better society, for equality, for justice, for all these lovely, beautiful concepts that we have read about, but I would like to see it realized. And then you drive into the city and you find these barricades or homeless communities living all over. And we ask, where have we gone? Have we retrogressed? Have we progressed? And as I am addressing you, my Lord, I'm also thinking of how my father would have also responded to this, because he did not die for social justice, to see injustice continuing in a different way. He wanted to see that every person who's homeless be given a home. Every family that is poor be at least given something on the table every night.
So the Imam didn't die for campus.
Not at all. Not at all, my Lord.
I see. I was just thinking loud, Council, you may press.
these are legitimate and important questions that ought to be explored now. I was just thinking on the question of the Tulba earthquake and where the Imam was taken over those 3 days in September, the 16th and 19th. The evidence is that during the first inquest, the legal representatives of family at that stage attempted to extract answers as to the whereabouts and where they had.
In the early 60s, talking about a number of others, even Jacob Bier from the Progressive Party, also, in other words, what this indicated was the Imam and his group were fairly open to debates. No matter from which political party, ideological view you are, we will sort of entertain you. And I think this is also what makes the Imam and his group very unique, in the sense that they were fairly open. Not to say that there were not others elsewhere in the country that acted in the same way, but here was a group led by an Imam that saw that bigger picture that you mentioned. And then this is the last point. Is in 1966, I distinctly remember in our house in the Pulse Road, we had a gathering of the Black Chefs. We all know the Black Chefs is a women's group organized by those who came from the white community, but who drew in many from the other racial groupings, and also were determined to bring about changes as best as they could. And the Imam entertained them in his home. In other words, he had like a, not a party, I don't like to use the word party, not the correct word, but a gathering where they could discuss some of these. It was a very open event, very not formal, but informal one. But the idea was just to touch base with groupings that were anti the state. And so that, again, of course, people like Yulali Stock, for example, even the leader, Helen Suzman, they were all basically there. And this sort of course, they might not have expressed themselves, but they did not like the way this Imam acted. But like we said, he was maybe one should express it this way, that he was one Imam who was thinking out of the box. And sometimes he acted out of the box. And in that way demonstrated his perceptions, his insights, and his experiences, and the knowledge he had that he used to the best of his ability at the time. Sorry for the aggressive moment.
As it will please us. My Lord, I'm pleased to advise that there has been some progress made in the area of recognition of marriages made under Islamic law. The matter has been litigated in the Constitutional Court. Has struck down provisions that discriminate against marriages under Islamic law. And I'm advised by my learned junior that in fact there is a Muslim Marriages Act which recognizes all aspects of marriages under Islamic law.
However, looking specifically to the protection of women and children, even within marriages, in respect of enjoying the estates when the parents pass on. Because this is what they had experienced, irrespective of the recognition of the marriage itself. But it does happen that even within marriages, that when the father passes on, the family comes in, the children and women lose. I'm saying in 2022, that's what women and children still experience, just like it happened in 1969. And that's why I'm expressing a hope that arising out of this engagement and the experience of Mr. Haron and the experiences of his mother as he had experienced, perhaps when we have occasion to give this, would have brought a change to its end. That's the wish I'm expressing.
Yes, indeed. It is to the extent that the Muslim Marriages Act does not extend to protecting entitlement to estates and property rights, particularly of women and girls. Then of course we do need urgent law reform in that regard. We will look into that aspect and advise the Lordship in due course. Mr. Haron, you spoke movingly about the role that your mother played, and perhaps the most fitting tribute you paid to her in your statement is that your mother shed silent tears, but stoically put her shoulder to the grindstone and built a new family home and made provision for her children. Would you agree that she stands as an example of South African mothers who endured such struggle and pain under apartheid?
Undoubtedly so. I think that's why, of course, we look within our families, my Lord, to our own relatives. In this case, of course, we look at our mother and the way she carried herself and the way she managed the affairs. When I look at myself and compare and say, but my heck, did I not learn from my mother? sorry to express it in that way, my lord, partly because she really managed. I think if you had to give her an opportunity to work in a factory and manage everybody, I think everybody would have had to be in line. Because that's how she used to carry herself, to see that things are in order, that the electricity is paid, the water is paid. She used to do all the civil duties. And on top of that, the familiar duties. And I think many of those who stayed in our home, whether family members or others, they can vouch for the fact of personality. She was up early in the morning. Well, Muslims normally pray, of course, as we move towards summer, early in the morning at about 5, 4, and she will be up from that time onwards, up to the time when she has to go to bed, seeing to all the chores. In addition to that, seeing to the dressmaking, that being a seamstress, a dressmaker, the clients that would come to basically see and organize herself. But there was a point after, in the post-death period, where she was forced to go out of the house to go and work. And she went to work for personal cleaners. Some of us are familiar with personal cleaners, the brand name cleaners. I was there with my cousin's husband, who, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately has Alzheimer's as we speak. So the two of us went there that day because the other lady, husband, Miss Amina, her husband could not make it for that particular day to deliver the food, and pulled me along down the side of Caledon police station and decided to shout because we didn't see any policemen around. So we just thank you. Thank you.
Answer? When the junior will be leading.
Bismillah. Say no más. And where does the money come?
The little wages he got that he used to give away, he always used to come running into her. Halima, I need 50 rand for this one. This one needs electricity or whatever. And then she stole, but then she stole it.
Is there anything else you would like to say? The Imam that you remember about the Imam?
He was a very good man, he was very generous to everybody, and always helping everybody. He always used to go into Rangla, those places, get food for people in the township.